The Zaxorian Empire had conquered over 300 planets across 6 galaxies. Their warships were feared. Their technology was advanced. Their methods were quick and brutal. And now, they had found Earth. Admiral Vexthor stood tall on the bridge of his command ship. His gray skin and 6 eyes made him look fierce to human standards. He watched the blue planet grow larger on the main screen. "This will be simple," he said to his crew. "From our studies, these humans have only basic space travel. They are divided into many small nations. They will be easy to bring into our empire." The plan was the same as always. Show force, make demands, and get the leaders to sign away their freedom. It usually took less than 2 weeks. Frank Miller did not look impressed as he sat at the large table in the United Nations building. As Secretary General, he had dealt with many difficult people, but never aliens. Next to him, his assistant Diane Powell took careful notes. Across the table, Admiral Vexthor and 3 other aliens waited. They had arrived on Earth yesterday. Their massive ships now hung in the sky above major cities around the world. "We welcome you to Earth," Frank said calmly. "We are interested in peaceful relations with your people." Admiral Vexthor slid a simple document across the table. "This is our standard annexation agreement. Your planet will become part of the Zaxorian Empire. You will provide resources and soldiers. In return, you get our protection and technology. Sign here." Frank looked at the paper, then smiled. "I'm afraid it's not that simple, Admiral. Earth has procedures for this sort of thing." Diane opened a large folder and began removing stacks of papers. "First, we need you to complete these forms for diplomatic recognition," she explained, placing a thick packet in front of the confused alien. "Then we need environmental impact studies for your ships. Are they leaking any radiation? What about exhaust fumes?" Admiral Vexthor blinked all 6 eyes. "That is not necessary. We are not asking. We are telling." "I understand," Frank said. "But even so, there are procedures. For example, have you registered with the Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs?" "There is no such department," Vexthor said. "There is now," Diane replied, sliding another form forward. "It was created yesterday after your arrival. You'll need to file these papers before we can continue talks." The Admiral stood up, his temper rising. "Perhaps you don't understand. We have conquered hundreds of worlds. Our ships can destroy your cities with one blast." Frank nodded calmly. "Yes, and that would be a violation of at least 16 international laws and treaties. Before any military action, you need to file an intent to engage in conflict. Here's the paperwork for that." Another stack of papers appeared. This one was even larger. Vexthor looked confused. No planet had ever responded like this. Usually there was fear, sometimes brave but futile resistance. Never paperwork. Also, Diane added, "You'll need separate agreements with all 193 member nations of the UN. Each has their own processes and requirements. I've prepared the preliminary contact forms for each country." She gestured to several boxes of papers in the corner of the room. "This is ridiculous," the Admiral growled. "We don't have time for this." "I understand completely," Frank said with a smile. "Government processes can be time-consuming. That's why we've prepared an expedited pathway. It should only take about 6 months instead of the usual 2 years." The aliens looked at each other in shock. In 6 months, they could conquer an entire galaxy arm. "We will return tomorrow," Vexthor said stiffly. "Be ready to surrender properly." As the aliens left, Diane turned to Frank. "Do you think it will work?" Frank smiled. They'd never faced Earth's most powerful weapon before. "What's that?" "Bureaucracy, Diane. Pure bureaucracy." Admiral Vexthor paced the command deck of his ship. 3 days had passed since the first meeting with the humans, and nothing had been signed. His superiors would not be pleased. "This is taking too long," he growled to his second-in-command. "Send Krell to deal with them. He is our best diplomat." Krell was smaller than most Zaxorians, but had a quick mind. He had helped bring 12 planets into the Empire through talk alone. Surely he could handle these humans and their odd ways. The next morning, Krell arrived at the State Department. He was led to a small office where Susan Baker waited. She wore a simple gray suit and had a friendly smile that did not reach her eyes. "Welcome," she said. "I understand you're here to speed things up." "Yes," Krell said, sitting down. "This process is taking too long. Admiral Vexthor is not patient." Susan nodded. "I understand completely. That's why I've prepared everything you need to get started right away." Krell felt relief. Finally, someone reasonable. Then Susan opened a drawer and took out a stack of papers that made yesterday's pile look small. "This is the non-terrestrial entity recognition application," she explained. "It must be completed before formal negotiations can begin. Each section needs to be filled out in triplicate." Krell looked at the papers. "How many sections are there?" "Just 42, Susan said, "though each has about 50 subsections." Krell's 6 eyes blinked rapidly. "This is not acceptable. The Zaxorian Empire does not fill out forms. We give orders." Susan's smile never changed. "I understand your frustration, but look at it this way. This is actually an expedited process. Normally, foreign governments need to apply for recognition through our embassy in their home territory first. We don't have an Earth embassy in Zaxorian space," Krell said. "Exactly, which is why we created this special process just for you." She pushed the papers closer to him. "You'll also need to provide proof of authorization to represent your government. Do you have your diplomatic credentials?" Krell reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal cube, the standard Zaxorian authorization device. "This contains all my credentials." Susan looked at it and shook her head. "I'm sorry, but we need paper documentation with official seals and signatures. Electronic-only credentials aren't accepted for initial registration." "But this is how all advanced civilizations share official documents," Krell protested. "Not on Earth," Susan replied. "Don't worry, I've prepared a credential validation request form as well." She added another packet to the pile. Krell took a deep breath. "What if we simply take what we want? Our ships could destroy your cities in minutes." "You could," Susan agreed, "but then you'd be in violation of the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, the international humanitarian laws, and about 24 other agreements. The paperwork for war crimes is extensive." She opened another drawer. "These are just the initial forms for military action against civilian populations." The drawer was filled with even more papers. Krell stared at the growing pile. Then he had an idea. "What if we just deal with one nation instead of all of them? Surely we can make an agreement with the most powerful country and ignore the rest." "An interesting approach," Susan said, "but that would require separate bilateral negotiation permits. Each country has different requirements. For the United States alone, you'll need approvals from 17 different agencies." She pulled out yet another form. "This is just the application to begin that process." Krell gathered all the papers. His arms were barely able to hold them all. "I will return tomorrow," he said stiffly. "Wonderful," Susan replied. "I'll schedule you for 9 a.m. Please bring the completed Section A with you. That will allow us to issue you a temporary processing number." As Krell walked out, he heard Susan call after him. "Don't forget to make copies for your records." 2 weeks had passed, and the Zaxorian Empire's patience was running out. Admiral Vexthor stood before the large view screen, his face dark with anger as he spoke to his superiors back in the Empire's capital. "These humans are using paper as a weapon," he explained. "They drown us in forms and wait while we struggle to complete them." The Supreme Commander's image flickered on the screen. "This is unacceptable. The Empire does not wait for lesser species. Use force, Admiral. Show them our power." Vexthor bowed. "As you command." The next day, 50 Zaxorian warships moved into position above Earth's major cities, their weapons systems powered up, glowing with deadly energy. This was the Empire's standard show of force. It had broken the will of countless worlds. Admiral Vexthor sent a simple message to all Earth governments. Surrender now or face destruction. You have 1 hour to decide. He sat back in his command chair, satisfied. Now they would see real action instead of endless paperwork. 30 minutes later, an alert sounded. Admiral, we're receiving thousands of messages from Earth, reported his communications officer. Good. They are surrendering, Vexthor said with a smile. No, sir. They're legal notices. The Admiral's smile vanished. What? On the screen appeared a human in a military uniform. Colonel Alan White from the Pentagon's newly formed Space Legal Defense Division looked calm and professional. Admiral Vexthor, this is a formal notice that your vessels are in violation of Earth orbital sovereignty regulations, which were ratified globally yesterday. Your ships are currently positioned in restricted airspace without proper clearance. Vexthor stood up, his anger rising. We don't need clearance. We are the Zaxorian Empire. I understand your position, Colonel White continued, but I must inform you that international courts have already filed injunctions against unauthorized atmospheric entry by your vessels. Here is the case number for your reference. He held up a document with a long series of numbers. Also, he added, we've noticed your ships are emitting certain particles into our upper atmosphere. Linda Martinez from the Environmental Protection Agency would like to speak with you about that. The screen split, and a woman in a business suit appeared. Admiral, our readings indicate your engines are releasing compounds not approved under the Clean Air Act. We'll need you to complete these emissions testing forms and submit your engine designs for review. She held up a thick binder. The fine for unauthorized emissions starts at $50,000 per ship per day. Vexthor slammed his fist on the control panel. We don't care about your fines. We are here to conquer. In that case, Colonel White said, I should mention that we've prepared the paperwork for official hostilities as well. Linda nodded. Though that will require environmental impact statements for any weapons you plan to use, especially if they might affect endangered species or protected habitats. Vexthor turned to his weapons officer. Fire a warning shot. Target the ocean near one of their coastal cities. The weapons officer pressed several controls. Nothing happened. Sir, our targeting systems aren't responding, he said with confusion. Colonel White smiled slightly. You might want to check your email, Admiral. Our cyber division has sent you a notice about unauthorized weapons targeting within Earth jurisdiction. Your systems have been temporarily locked pending proper licensing and safety inspection. Vexthor couldn't believe what he was hearing. How did you access our systems? Our technology is far superior to yours. Perhaps, Linda said, but your landing teams had to connect to our internet to download and print all those forms. We simply followed the connection back. The Admiral stared at the screen in shock. The humans hadn't used missiles or fighters to defend themselves. They had used bureaucracy, regulations, and now, apparently, computer code. Admiral, his communications officer said weakly, we've just received 3,000 more notices of violation from different Earth agencies and governments. They all require immediate response. Vexthor sat down heavily in his command chair. This was going to be a very long day. 6 months had passed since the Zaxorian Empire discovered Earth. What was supposed to be a simple 2-week annexation had turned into a nightmare of forms, regulations, and endless meetings. Admiral Vexthor had sent desperate messages back to the Empire, trying to explain the situation. Now the Emperor himself was coming to Earth. Emperor HFY had ruled the Zaxorian Empire for 300 years. No one had ever dared to defy him. His golden ship was 10 times larger than any other in the fleet. It entered Earth orbit with a display of lights meant to inspire fear and awe. Strangely, the humans seemed unimpressed. They simply sent a message requesting that the Emperor's ship register for a parking orbit and file flight plans. In a plain government building in Washington, D.C., Emperor HFY sat in an uncomfortable chair designed for humans, not 8-foot-tall aliens with 4 arms. Across the desk sat Peter Johnson, a middle-aged man with glasses and a polite smile. "Welcome to Earth, Your Highness," Peter said. "I'm the Assistant Deputy Director for the Extraterrestrial Affairs Compliance Department." The Emperor's voice was deep and cold. "I am Salag VII, ruler of the Zaxorian Empire, conqueror of 6 galaxies. I have come to end this foolishness and complete our annexation of your world." Peter nodded and typed something on his computer. "I see. Do you have an appointment? I don't see you in our system." The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "I do not need an appointment. I am the Emperor." "I understand completely," Peter said. "However, all visiting dignitaries must schedule through our online portal. But since you're here, I can try to fit you in." He typed some more. "It looks like I can squeeze you in for a preliminary credential verification. Do you have your identification documents?" The Emperor slammed one of his 4 hands on the desk. "I am the Emperor. My face is on the currency of 1,000 worlds. I need no identification." Peter didn't flinch. "I understand your frustration, but our systems require proper documentation. Your credentials don't match our database requirements." He handed the Emperor a thick packet. "Here's Form XA7B for establishing Imperial Identity Verification." The Emperor stared at the form. "This is 60 pages long." "Yes, it's the short form," Peter explained. "The standard version is 120 pages. The Emperor took a deep breath. "Listen carefully, human. I have destroyed entire star systems for less than this insult. Why should I not order your world erased right now?" Peter smiled again. "That would be your right, of course. Though it would trigger the Interplanetary Conflict Resolution Protocol, which requires a 40-day public comment period before any hostile action can be taken." He opened a drawer and pulled out another stack of forms. "Plus, there's a separate application for each weapon type you plan to use. Environmental impact studies are required for all planet-scale weapons." The Emperor was speechless. Finally, he asked, "How long would all this take?" Peter checked his computer. "For expedited processing, 3 to 5 years, unless you file a Freedom of Information Act request, which could speed things up by a few months." "Years?" The Emperor's voice rose in disbelief. "I know it seems like a long time," Peter said sympathetically. "That's why I'd recommend establishing a joint committee to address these issues. We could have preliminary talks about the committee within 6 months." The Emperor stood up, his impressive height making the office seem small. "This is absurd. No planet has ever treated the Empire this way." "I understand," Peter said. "If you'd like to file a complaint, I have the forms right here." He reached for yet another drawer. "No, no more forms." The Emperor turned to leave, then paused. "How do your people live like this? How do you accomplish anything with so many rules and papers?" Peter smiled. "We ask ourselves that question every day, Your Highness. Would you like to schedule a follow-up appointment? I have an opening next Thursday at 2:15. The Emperor left without answering, wondering if perhaps Earth was more powerful than the Empire had realized. 8 months into their Earth mission, the Zaxorians decided to try a new approach. Instead of force or direct annexation, they would build goodwill through cultural exchange. Surely this would be simpler than the political process. Admiral Vexthor sent his cultural attaché, Zilna, to meet with Earth officials. Zilna was known throughout the Empire for her diplomatic skills and patience. If anyone could make progress with these humans, it would be her. Zilna met with Carol Nelson from the Department of Education in a bright office filled with plants and colorful posters. Carol seemed genuinely excited about the idea of cultural exchange. "This is wonderful," Carol said, offering Zilna a cup of tea. "We would love to learn more about Zaxorian culture and to share ours with you." Zilna felt hopeful for the first time since arriving on Earth. "We could begin with simple educational programs. Perhaps Zaxorian teachers could visit Earth schools, and Earth teachers could visit our worlds." "Absolutely," Carol agreed. We just need to work out a few details." She opened her laptop and began typing. "First, we'll need curriculum approval. Educational content must meet the standards of each state board of education." "Each state?" Zilna asked. "How many are there?" 50 in the United States alone, Carol explained. "And each country has its own educational system. For a truly global program, we'd need approvals from about 200 different educational authorities." Zilna's hope began to fade. "That sounds complicated." "Oh, it's not so bad," Carol said cheerfully. "I've prepared some preliminary paperwork to get us started." She pointed to 3 large binders on her desk. "These cover just the basic requirements." Zilna looked at the binders with growing concern. "What else would we need?" "Well, there's accreditation for alien educators," Carol continued. "Since Zaxorian teaching credentials aren't recognized on Earth, they would need provisional certification. That's forms ED 103 through ED 259. She pulled out another binder. "Then there's insurance and liability. Any educational exchange program requires coverage for all participants. We'll need to establish whether existing policies cover extraterrestrial incidents." Zilna took a deep breath. How long would all this take? "For a basic approval?" "About 18 months, Carol said. "Full implementation might take 3 to 5 years. But don't worry. We can start with a pilot program in just 9 months. 9 months for a pilot program. Zilna could hardly believe it. "That's actually quite fast," Carol assured her. "We're very excited about this initiative." Zilna thought carefully before speaking again. What if we simply provided some cultural materials? Books about our history, images of our art, recordings of our music. Would that be simpler? "That's a great idea," Carol said. "Though we would need content review for educational appropriateness, age ratings, cultural sensitivity screening, and copyright clearance." She opened a drawer and took out yet another form. "This is just the preliminary content submission request." Zilna looked at the form. It was 17 pages long. "Is all this really necessary?" she asked. Carol nodded seriously. "Education is very important to us. We need to ensure all materials are appropriate and beneficial." As they talked, Zilna noticed something interesting. On Carol's desk was a report titled "Adaptation of Alien Administrative Techniques for Earth Government Efficiency." She could see diagrams of Zaxorian filing systems. "Are you studying our administrative methods?" Zilna asked. Carol smiled. "Oh yes, your empire has some fascinating organizational approaches. We've already implemented several in our department. Efficiency is up 20%. Zilna realized with surprise that humans weren't just defending themselves with bureaucracy. They were learning from the aliens and improving their own systems. The thought was somehow frightening. "I think I need to report back to the Admiral," Zilna said, gathering her notes. Carol handed her one more form. "Wonderful. Here's the meeting summary documentation request. Please fill it out before you leave." 1 year had passed since the Zaxorian Empire discovered Earth. Back in the Imperial capital, crisis meetings were happening daily. The situation was unprecedented. Director Zoll stood before the Imperial Council, nervously adjusting his uniform. As head of the Zaxorian Processing Department, it was his job to handle the administrative side of conquests. But Earth had broken all his systems. "Esteemed council members," Zoll began, "I regret to report that we face a serious backlog crisis. Our administrative resources are overwhelmed." The council chamber grew loud with angry voices. One member stood up. "How can one small planet cause such problems? We conquer entire star systems in less time." Zoll displayed a hologram showing mountains of paperwork. "The humans have generated more forms, requests, and requirements than our last 50 conquests combined. Our staff cannot keep up." Another council member growled. "Then ignore their paperwork. Use force." "We tried," Zoll explained. "But their legal systems have created a defensive barrier. Our ships are tangled in court orders, environmental violations, and orbital parking fines. The fines alone increased by millions of credits daily. The council fell silent as they realized the seriousness of the situation. "There's more," Zol continued reluctantly. "We discovered that humans are deliberately introducing small errors into documents." "Errors?" asked the Emperor from his throne at the head of the council. "Yes, Your Highness. A wrong date here, a misspelled name there. Under our own protocols, each error requires complete resubmission of the entire document. They are using our perfectionism against us." Back on Earth, Captain Greg Stevens of the U.S. Navy sat in a meeting with representatives from 30 countries. On the screen behind him was a chart titled Operation Paperstorm. "The strategy is working better than we expected," Greg explained to the group. "By following every procedure to the letter and working to rule, we've effectively created a defensive shield made entirely of paperwork." A woman from the French delegation raised her hand. "The aliens have started rejecting some forms due to what they call improper formatting." Greg smiled. "That's Phase 2 working perfectly. Every rejection means they have to process additional forms explaining the rejection. We're creating an administrative loop that multiplies their work." In orbit above Earth, Admiral Vexthor received more bad news. His resources were stretched thin. 20% of his fleet's personnel were now dedicated to processing Earth paperwork. Supply ships that should be delivering weapons were instead bringing more administrative staff and document processing equipment. "Sir," reported his logistics officer, "we've had to convert 3 battle cruisers into floating office space." Vexthor could hardly believe what was happening. "How are they doing this? Their technology is primitive compared to ours." His chief analyst had a theory. "It seems, Admiral, that humans have spent centuries developing bureaucracy as an art form. Their governments, corporations, and universities have refined these processes over generations. They have weaponized paperwork. Can we learn their techniques?" Vexthor asked desperately. "Beat them at their own game." On Earth, Peter Johnson from the Extraterrestrial Affairs Compliance Department received an unusual request. The Zaxorians wanted to hire human administrative consultants to help them process the backlog. Peter brought this to his boss, who called the Secretary of Defense, who contacted the President. Within hours, a plan was formed. "We'll send them an expert," the President decided. "Someone who can help them, in our own special way." The next day, Paul Davis boarded a shuttle to the Zaxorian command ship. Paul had 30 years of experience in government administration and corporate management systems. His briefcase contained presentations on quality management, performance metrics, and continuous improvement protocols. The Zaxorians thought they were getting help. What they were actually getting was Bureaucracy 2.0, designed to make their administrative problems even worse. As Paul's shuttle docked with the alien ship, he smiled to himself. The Zaxorians had no idea what was coming. 2 weeks after Paul Davis arrived on the Zaxorian command ship, Admiral Vexthor stared in horror at the new organizational charts displayed on the main screen. What had begun as an attempt to learn human administrative techniques had turned into a nightmare. "I don't understand," Vexthor said, looking at the complex diagrams. "How does this improve our efficiency?" Paul Davis smiled confidently. "This is a state-of-the-art quality management system. Each department now has its own oversight committee, which reports to a supervisory board, which answers to a review panel. But that's 3 extra layers of administration," the Admiral protested. "Exactly," Paul beamed. "That's how we ensure quality control. Each form now passes through 7 checkpoint stages before final processing." Vexthor rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. "And these performance metrics, what purpose do they serve?" "They measure how well each department is meeting its targets," Paul explained. "We've implemented daily reporting requirements for all staff members. The data will be compiled into weekly summary reports, which will inform monthly performance evaluations." The Admiral watched as his once efficient crew now spent hours each day filing reports about their work instead of actually doing it. And yet, he couldn't deny that Earth's bureaucratic systems seemed powerful. There had to be some secret to them that the Empire could use. Meanwhile, back on Earth, a bold new plan was taking shape. In a secure conference room deep beneath the Pentagon, Captain Greg Stevens met with a team of computer specialists and diplomats. "We've successfully infiltrated their communication networks," explained tech specialist Kelly Martinez. "Now we're ready for Phase 3 of Operation Paperstorm." Greg nodded approvingly. "Explain it to our diplomatic team." Kelly displayed a complex diagram on the wall screen. The Zaxorians have a standardized communication system that connects their entire empire. All planets use the same forms, the same protocols, the same administrative systems. It's how they maintain control. "And we're going to use that against them," Greg added. Kelly nodded. "Exactly. We've prepared thousands of Earth-style forms, requests, and regulatory notices. But instead of just sending them to the ships in our orbit, we're going to transmit them to every Zaxorian-controlled planet in the galaxy." The diplomats looked shocked. One of them raised his hand. "You mean we're going to export our bureaucracy to their entire empire?" "Precisely," Greg said with a smile. "Imagine every conquered world suddenly filing Earth-style paperwork with the Empire. The administrative load won't just double, it will increase 1,000-fold." Back on the Zaxorian command ship, alarms suddenly blared. The communications officer looked up in panic. "Admiral, we're receiving an unprecedented number of transmissions." "From Earth?" Vex Thor asked. "No, sir. From our own colonies. Planets we conquered years ago are suddenly filing paperwork, Earth-style paperwork." The Admiral rushed to the communication station. On the screen, he saw thousands of messages pouring in from across the Empire. Formal requests, compliance reports, environmental impact statements, administrative appeals, all following Earth formats. "How is this possible?" Vex Thor whispered. His chief analyst looked grim. "It appears the humans have transmitted their administrative techniques to our colonies, and the conquered worlds are using them to flood our systems with requests." "Can we block the transmissions?" the Admiral asked desperately. "We tried, sir, but they're coming through official channels. According to Imperial protocol, we are required to process all official communications." Vex Thor realized with growing horror what was happening. Earth had found a way to turn the Empire's strict order against itself. They had weaponized bureaucracy, and now were using it to attack the entire Zaxorian Empire. "Sir," the communications officer said weakly, "the Emperor is calling. He wants an explanation for why the Imperial capital is suddenly receiving millions of regulatory filings from every corner of the Empire." Vex Thor sank into his command chair. How could he explain that Earth's greatest weapon wasn't nuclear missiles or advanced technology, but paperwork? 3 years had passed since the Zaxorian Empire first discovered Earth. What was meant to be a simple conquest had turned into the greatest crisis in Imperial history. The once mighty Zaxorian fleet hung in Earth orbit, but not as conquerors. Their ships were now floating office spaces, processing centers, and storage facilities for the endless paperwork generated by humans. The Empire's resources were stretched to breaking point. In a nondescript conference room at the Department of Commerce in Washington, D.C., the final treaty negotiations were about to begin. No grand hall or historic building had been chosen for this moment. Just a plain room with a long table, uncomfortable chairs, and a coffee machine in the corner. Emperor Xalag VII entered the room with just 2 advisors. Gone was his golden armor and flowing cape. He now wore a simple gray suit made to fit his alien form. The past 3 years had aged him visibly. Margaret Johnson, director of the Treaty Division, greeted him with a polite smile. She was a middle-aged woman with glasses and graying hair. Nothing about her suggested she was about to negotiate the end of an interstellar conflict. "Thank you for coming, Your Highness," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Would you like some coffee before we begin?" The Emperor sat down heavily. "No, thank you. Let us finish this." Margaret nodded and opened a folder. "As you know, We've prepared two options for today's discussion. She removed two documents and placed them side by side on the table. Option 1 is our comprehensive treaty package. It includes trade agreements, cultural exchange protocols, diplomatic recognition procedures, environmental compliance standards, and mutual defense provisions. The Emperor looked at the document. It was over 500 pages long. The approval process would involve ratification by all UN member states, plus regional bodies, environmental agencies, and trade organizations, Margaret explained. The expected timeline for full implementation is approximately 25 years. The Emperor's eyes widened in shock. 25 years. That's our accelerated timeline, Margaret clarified. The standard process would be closer to 40 years. She then pointed to the second document, which was just 10 pages long. Option 2 is our simplified trade agreement. It recognizes Earth as a sovereign and independent planet, establishes basic diplomatic relations, and creates a framework for limited trade and cultural exchange. The Emperor picked up the shorter document. And how long would this take to implement? We could have it done in 3 months, Margaret said. It requires only standard approvals, most of which have been pre-authorized. The Emperor looked suspicious. What's the catch? Margaret smiled. No catch. Option 2 simply recognizes the current reality. Your empire doesn't want the administrative burden of trying to control Earth, and we prefer our independence. She slid a report across the table. Our analysts have calculated that the Zaxorian Empire has already spent more resources trying to conquer Earth than it would have gained from us in 50 years of rule. The Emperor knew she was right. The administrative contagion that started on Earth had spread throughout his empire. Worlds that had been under Zaxorian control for centuries were now burying imperial governors in paperwork. The entire system was at risk of collapse. You never defeated us in battle, the Emperor said quietly. Not a single shot was fired. We didn't need to, Margaret replied. We have spent thousands of years developing bureaucracy, refining it across countless governments, corporations, and institutions. It is perhaps humanity's most powerful creation. The Emperor picked up a pen and signed the shorter document. The mighty Zaxorian Empire had been defeated not by weapons or technology, but by the humble form, the committee meeting, and the polite but firm, "Please resubmit your application." As he stood to leave, the Emperor had one final question. Your people suffer under these same systems. How do you bear it? Margaret smiled. We complain about it constantly. It's one of our favorite pastimes. The Emperor nodded slowly, finally understanding something fundamental about humans. They had not just survived bureaucracy. They had mastered it.